Historic droughts are occurring around the world. We're seeing it in the United States, Brazil, North Korea, South Africa, and parts of China, just to name a few areas, all experiencing much lower than average precipitation. Severe dry spells in California have forced residents to dramatically reduce their use of water. California is the most populous U.S. state, and if it was its own country, it would be one of the largest economies in the world. Farmers there are struggling to maintain their crops. And as CCTV's Mei Lee reports, what happens on the ground in California has a direct impact around the world.
The third largest state geographically in the U.S. produces 2/3 of the country's produce and 80% of the world's almonds. But the historic drought, now in its fourth year, is putting a strain on the entire industry. Last year, some 200,000 hectares of farmland lay fallow, costing the agriculture industry $1.5 billion in revenue and 17,000 seasonal and part-time jobs. Experts believe farmland left unseeded could double in 2015. With reservoirs drying up, farmers are resorting to groundwater, which means drillers like Matt Rotman are in high demand.
Under normal weather conditions, I would say 60% of irrigation water comes from the aqueducts and the reservoirs and canals. The rest of it comes from groundwater. But right now it's the opposite. About 2/3 of it comes from the ground, and the other third comes from the reservoirs. And we're just not set up for that.
California farmers are changing the way they irrigate fields to cope with the drought.
This orchard used to be flood irrigated, then we added the sprinkler irrigation, so it was more efficient than the flood. And now we have the drip irrigation, which is well up in the 90th percentile as far as efficiency.
Farmers are also prioritizing what they grow to offset water shortages and maximize profits. For example, cotton is a commodity easily grown in other states. So farmers here are sacrificing their cotton fields and using the water for crops more unique to California, such as nuts. The demand for almonds, the state's biggest agricultural export, is exploding worldwide. China is the #1 market for California almonds. But could this shift in California negatively impact the variety of foods supplied to the rest of the country and the world?
We are so intertwined now in terms of where the demand comes from, where the supply comes from, and then we have an ability with a robust global supply chain to really procure, source somewhere and bring it to somewhere else and offset the temporary shortages that you may find otherwise be detrimental to the demand side.
There is potentially some good news on the horizon for California. Meteorologists say this year's El Nino could produce a very wet winter, but they stress that one El Nino will not solve the drought crisis. And that means conservation efforts will become the norm, since water is a finite resource that can't be completely controlled. Mei Lee, CCTV, Los Angeles.